Financial abuse rarely looks obvious at first. It hides behind words like trust me and I'll take care of it. In this unbelievable story, a hardworking woman thinks she is building a stable future with her husband until she discovers secret records exposing years of reckless spending, hidden debts, and manipulation. While she was funding their entire life, he was quietly losing money and planning to control her finances completely. And the evidence she finds will leave you speechless.
On my 18th birthday, my mom fastened a silver locket around my neck. She said, "This will protect you, Chloe." My husband Julian always hated it. "It's just a tacky piece of silver." He was constantly trying to convince me to take it off, but I refused. Until one morning, I got out of the shower, glanced at my reflection, and my blood ran cold. The locket was gone. While I was desperately searching for it, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was my brother Mark. "Stop looking. Get Lily and leave the house now. I'm waiting downstairs." I just froze. Now, before we go on, I just want to thank you for watching. Let me know where you're from in the comments. I honestly love knowing who's on the other side of this screen. Please remember, this story is a work of fiction made for your entertainment. Any similarity to real people or events is purely a coincidence, but the message is very real. The bathroom was still heavy with steam when I stepped out. I reached for the small porcelain dish on my dresser. A motion so automatic after all these years it was like breathing. My fingers touched the cool ceramic and then empty space. I looked down. The dish was there, but it was empty. The silver locket was gone. My first reaction was purely logical. I scanned the top of the dresser. I checked the floor, my eyes tracing the lines of the hardwood planks. I even lifted the corner of the rug to peek underneath. Nothing. I opened the dresser drawer beneath it, thinking maybe it had slid off and fallen in. Inside was just a silk scarf and a bottle of gardenia hand cream Julian bought me last month, back when he was still making those small, thoughtful gestures. But no locket. I stood up and looked in the mirror. The glass was still fogged over, my reflection a blur, my features soft and uncertain in a way that felt alien to me. My fingers instinctively went to the hollow of my throat. After 11 years, wearing that locket had left a pale line on my skin, a tiny indentation I only noticed in moments like this. The skin felt bare, exposed in a way I couldn't describe, but a cold dread was already starting to crawl up my spine. I wrapped my robe around me and walked to the bedroom door. Across the hall, my daughter Lily's door was cracked open, just how I always left it. The warm, amber glow of her nightlight spilled into the hallway. She was sound asleep. I could hear the soft, even rhythm of her breathing. She was just 5 years old, totally innocent and safe from whatever was happening in our home. I had to keep it that way. I was still standing there when I heard Julian's footsteps in the hall. He came around the corner carrying a breakfast tray, moving with the easy, unhurried gait of a man who has nothing to hide. On the tray was my favorite mug, the one with a small chip on the rim that I could never bring myself to throw away. Steam rose from the chamomile tea inside. He made it for me every single night, without fail. Ever since I told him once, years ago, that it helped me relax, I always considered it one of his little acts of love, one of those quiet routines that form the bedrock of a life together. He smiled when he saw me there. It was one of his good smiles, warm and a little shy, the kind that had made me trust him completely when we first met. It was as if he was always a little surprised to find himself loved. He had such an honest face. "You're up early," he said, setting the tray on the nightstand. "I was just about to bring this in for you." "My locket is gone," I said, my voice empty, watching his reaction. He paused for a second, then turned toward the bathroom. "Your locket?" he repeated, the way people do when they're buying time to school their features. Then he walked in, glanced at the dresses, opened a drawer, and looked at the floor. It was a decent performance, but not flawless. A person who is actually looking for something moves differently. The body always knows what the mind is trying to hide. After 11 years as an architect, I know how materials behave under stress, how a hairline fracture in a foundation can reveal the entire history of a building. I'd learned to read structures the way other people read faces. And Julian Thorne was not looking for my locket. He was looking at me, trying to see just how much I was panicking. "I don't see it," he said, walking back into the bedroom. "Maybe you left it at the office or at your brother's place last weekend." "I never take it off," I said evenly. "You know that." He came over and put his hands on my shoulders. His thumbs began to press in slow circles on my muscles, the exact spot I once told him I carry all my tension. He remembered. He always remembered every single tiny thing I told him. For 4 years, I'd mistaken that kind of intense observation for love. "It's just a locket, Chloe. We'll find it. And if we don't, I'll get you something better. Something that actually fits your style." He said that last part with a small, loving smile, the kind that implied my attachment to that old piece of silver was cute but a little childish. Something that actually fits your style. I'd heard that line before. He was always upgrading things, refining my tastes, gently nudging my decisions until I could barely remember what I liked in the first place. His hands were warm. The pressure was precise. It was always exactly the same, as like a finely tuned instrument. For years, I believed that kind of precision was a sign of his devotion. But standing there in my robe with his hands on me and my locket missing, I began to see it as something else entirely. "You're right," I said. "I probably just put it somewhere." I gently stepped away from him, trying to make the move seem like I was just tired, not like I was recoiling. "Let me check my coat. I might have dropped it in a pocket on Sunday." He nodded, gesturing to the tea. "Drink this first. I can check the office for you later if you want." He left the room. I waited, listening until his footsteps disappeared down the hall. Then I walked to the armchair where my coat was thrown. I dug into the pocket and my fingers closed around my phone. I looked at the screen. One missed call from my brother. I ducked into the bedroom closet, pressing my back against the wall, and called him back. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Chloe." His voice was hollow, completely drained of its usual warmth and teasing. It was the voice of a man giving an order. My brother, Mark Vance, had navigated hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and deals that would have broken other men. I had never, not once, heard fear in his voice. Not when our mother died. Not when his first startup failed. Never. But he was there now, shaking, and that sound alone sent a wave of pure dread through my body. "I need you to be very calm and just listen." My hand was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. "Mark, what's going on? Where is my locket?" "The locket worked," he said. There was a bit of silence, and I could hear him taking a long, deep breath, trying to force his voice to be steady. "When the clasp broke, the failsafe was triggered. The internal mic activated and streamed everything within a 15-foot radius to my secure server. Chloe, I have the recording. You need to listen to this. Right now." The room started to feel like it was tilting. I mean that literally. The small, dark closet, smelling of cedar and Julian's cologne, began to shift around me. It's the feeling you get when you realize the very ground beneath your feet isn't solid. My free hand flew out to the wall to steady myself, my nails scratching the paint. "Play it," I whispered. But what I really meant was, please don't. Please just tell me this is a huge mistake. That my locket fell behind the dresser, and this is all just one big misunderstanding. But my brother played the recording, and the first voice I heard belonged to Julian. And I have to be very clear about what was so wrong with his voice, because the wrongness was so total that my brain tried to reject it, like your body rejecting a poison. It was Julian's voice, the same tone, the same rhythm I had heard for 4 years across the dinner table on lazy Saturday mornings, in the dark when he thought I was asleep. The same voice that read architectural magazines to me at night because I always fell asleep before he finished the first article. That exact voice. But everything that made it his was stripped away. There was no warmth, no humor, none of that gentle tone he used when he was trying to make me smile. The voice on the recording was cold and clinical, like a man reading technical specifications, a man who had reduced the task at hand to a simple problem of logistics. The sedative has to reach its full effect by morning. I'll tell her it's some new herbal blend from that shop she likes. She won't ask questions. She never questions the tea. My stomach plummeted so fast, I swear I felt the jolt in my feet. Then another voice chimed in, one that twisted my guts in a completely different way. Helen, my mother-in-law, the woman who'd called me her daughter from another mother at every family dinner for 4 years, who squeezed my hand at our wedding and whispered I was the best thing to ever happen to her son, who cried actual tears during our rehearsal dinner, saying she'd always wanted a daughter exactly like me. On the recording, her voice was brisk and professional, the tone of a make sure the dosage is strong enough so she can't fight or speak clearly when they come for her. And Liam, those trust documents better be ready before she's thinking straight. We only get one shot at this. I know, mother. Liam's voice on the recording was clipped, annoyed. The papers were drafted 6 weeks ago. And the girl, Mrs. Croft's voice dropped, like she couldn't stand to name the awful thing she was talking about. What about Mia? She stays. She's leverage if this gets complicated, but it won't. A bit of silence. By the time Elara's head is clear enough to call someone, everything will be filed. My knees just buckled. I grabbed a clothing rack to steady myself, my knuckles white on the metal bar. A whole row of hangers slid and crashed together, the sound echoing in the small closet, and I shoved my fist to my mouth to stifle a scream. My eyes burned with tears. I absolutely could not cry. Not now. Not with just a few inches of wood between me and the hallway where Liam Croft waited with a tray, holding the tea meant to poison me. I blinked them away with so much force it hurt. My chest felt like it was caving in, my ribs crushing my lungs. 4 years. 4 years of sweet talk and his hands on my shoulders, telling me I was safe. 4 years of him saying, I love you and I'll always protect you. 6 weeks. He'd had the papers ready for 6 whole weeks. Mia's name. He said, my daughter's name in a sentence about leverage. In that 1 second, something inside of me just snapped. It wasn't just anger or terror or grief. It was the sound all 3 of them make when they collide and forge something new, something harder, something that knew exactly what it had to do. Elara. My father's voice suddenly cut through on the phone, thin and tight, stripped down to pure instinct, a dad trying to save his kid from 1,000 miles away. Now listen to me. Don't go for your jewelry. Do not pack anything. You cannot give him any reason to suspect you know. I need you to grab Mia and walk out of that apartment right now. Dominic is on your street, 2 blocks away from you. He is waiting, Dad. My voice just cracked in half. I bit my cheek until the pain forced it shut. Elara, please. I'd heard my father, Arthur Vance, say the word please just twice in my entire life. Both times it felt like the world was actually ending. Now go get your daughter. A knock on the closet door. 3 soft, deliberate taps. 3 knocks from a man who wasn't in any rush because he thought he'd already won the game. And then I heard Liam's voice, as warm and familiar as the hand I'd held in hospital waiting rooms and in taxis across the world. As warm as the man I thought I loved with my whole heart. Elara, your tea is getting cold, honey. You okay in there? My heart was pounding against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it through the oak door, through the silk dresses, through the 4 years of lies that stood between us. My hands were shaking. My legs felt like they had no bones in them at all. The weight of a 4-year marriage I had believed in was crushing the air from my lungs. I took one single breath. I found that silent, steady place deep inside myself. The place I retreat to when a difficult art restoration is about to fail and one wrong move could destroy everything. It's the place where my hands stop shaking and my focus becomes sharp, where only the task at hand exists. I found that place, went inside, and I pulled the door closed behind me. "I'm fine," I called out, my voice sounding warm and even completely normal. "Just looking for my favorite sweater. I'll be right out." I ended the call. I pressed my palms flat against my legs for 3 seconds, letting the shaking stop until my face was a calm, empty mask. Then I opened the closet door and smiled at my husband. It was the best acting performance I have ever given, and it bought me exactly 3 minutes. That was all I needed. 3 minutes. I'd calculated it while I was standing in that closet, my heart pounding out the seconds. Liam would take the tea back to the kitchen. He'd stand at the counter and check his phone. He always did this around, now scrolling through work emails with the intense focus of a man who always had to look busy. 3 minutes, maybe 4 if I was lucky. That was all the time I had to get from the woman I was in that closet to the woman I needed to be. I walked out of our bedroom with my cardigan draped over my shoulders, my voice perfectly casual, like a woman who just thought of a simple errand. Every single step I took was deliberate, because I knew one wrong noise could bring this whole thing crashing down. "I'm just going to pop outside for a walk," I said, stopping at the edge of the hallway, "to get some fresh air. I've had this headache all day, and I think the cold will feel good." Liam looked up from the kitchen. His face shifted into an expression of concern, a practiced, fluid movement I knew so well. It was assembled, not felt. The slight frown, the softened eyes, his body turning towards me. I had seen him do that hundreds of times, and I used to think it was love. Standing there, with that recording burned into my memory, I saw it for the cold, calculated machine it had always been. "I'll come with you," he offered, setting his phone down. "No, it's okay." I shook my head and managed a small, tired smile that looked just real enough. "I really just need 10 minutes alone in the cold. You know how I get. I'll be back before the tea's even ready." I walked across the room to him, patting his arm as I passed by, a familiar, easy gesture from a wife who's touched that arm a million times before. "Go on, watch some TV. You've been on your feet all day." He held my gaze for a second too long. I met it without flinching. I let my eyes look exhausted and loving and completely empty of the truth storming inside me. He finally nodded. "Okay, but grab your coat. It's bitter out there." "I will," I lied. I walked to the front door. I did not grab my coat. The moment I turned the corner and heard the TV click on, I moved. I didn't run. Running is loud, and the bedrooms were only 10 feet down the hall. And Liam Croft always heard everything. I moved like I do in the lab, when the air itself feels ancient and fragile. I knew that one wrong move could break something that could never be repaired. I pushed open the door to Mia's room. She was asleep on her side, clutching a stuffed bear she's had since she was a toddler. Her dark hair was spilling across the pillow, her mouth a little open in that deep, trusting sleep of a child who knows she is perfectly safe. The night light cast a soft golden circle on her cheek, and in that light she looked so small, so completely untouched by what was happening in the next room, that looking at her was like staring directly into the sun. Something inside my chest just tore wide open, and I had to press my fist against it to hold myself together. She felt safe. She felt safe because she didn't know what was in that tea. She didn't know what her own father was planning. She didn't know that when she woke up, her whole understanding of the word home would be gone forever. She didn't know that the man who read her bedtime stories in funny voices had just called her leverage. She didn't know any of it. And for the rest of tonight, that was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Come on, my love," I whispered, sliding my arms under her and lifting her into my arms in a motion I've done thousands of times. She felt heavy, a solid, warm weight in my arms, her whole body limp with trust. I wrapped her blanket around her shoulders, tucked it under her chin, and held her as tight as I could. She stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy and soft with sleep, like she was returning from far away. Mommy. Her voice was barely a whisper. Shh. I kissed her forehead. My own eyes were burning so badly I could barely see her face. We're going on an adventure, a secret one. Close your eyes. A secret, she whispered, and her eyes fluttered shut with the absolute trust of a 5-year-old who'd never known me to lie. The power in that single word, that perfect faith, it just about shattered me right there. I carried her down the hall to the balcony door of the guest room. Ivy covered the iron trellis, its leaves long dead in the November air. I knew how the cold metal would feel before I touched it, the same rungs I had tested yesterday, making sure they would hold our weight. But tonight, this was not a drill. I knew that metal. It was cold, rough, and solid the way old iron always is, built to last. Lily's arms tightened around my neck as I hooked my leg over the railing, my foot searching for the first rung. My slippers were flimsy cotton, completely useless for this, and the metal felt like a solid bar of ice against my foot. The night air was sharp and clean, carrying the first real bite of winter. I gripped the trellis hard, shifted Lily's sleeping weight, and took one long, steadying breath. And then I began to climb down. Each rung was a decision. Every move was slow and careful, balancing my daughter's body against my own, shifting our gravity with every single step. Lily's head was tucked into my neck, her breath warm against my skin, her fingers tangled in my sweater. She never even stirred. She trusted the motion the same way she trusted me with everything, without a single doubt, just because I was her mother. The second my feet hit the wet lawn, a sound ripped out of me that I didn't expect. It wasn't a sob or a laugh, just a nameless noise, a single, sharp gasp of something too big for my body to hold anymore, like a pressure valve releasing. Lily's weight was a solid, warm anchor against me. The grass was freezing, soaking right through my thin slippers. The night smelled like rain, damp earth, and something green fighting to stay alive. And then, at the end of the driveway, a pair of headlights flashed twice. Leo. I slapped a hand to my mouth to kill the sound that wanted to escape when I saw his car. My legs were shaking so hard I could feel my teeth chattering. I'd actually done it. I took one step toward the lights, and then the bedroom window right above me exploded with light. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. This wasn't the careful, controlled climb down. This was pure animal panic, me, now barefoot on the grass, just running, clutching Lily to my chest, my slippers lost somewhere behind me in the dark. I hit the Audi, and Leo already had the back door open, leaning across the seat with a look I hadn't seen on him since he was a federal prosecutor. It was the look a man gets when he's seen true evil and is making the conscious choice to keep moving anyway. "Get in," he said. So I did. He slammed the door shut, and the car was peeling out before I was even fully seated. "Leo," my voice came out all wrong, like thin paper. Lily stirred against me, making a small sound of complaint. I rubbed her back slowly and tried again. Leo, the window, did he see?" "He saw the garden light turn on. Then he hit the bedroom light," Leo said, his eyes locked on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, only by pure force of will. "He'll check Lily's room next. By the time he knows, we'll be on the freeway." He blew out a sharp breath. "Dad-'s been patched into the building's security cameras for the last 40 minutes. Ethan is not going to be able to follow you." The sob I'd been choking back since hiding in the closet finally broke free. It ripped out of me in one ugly, heaving gasp that I had no control over. I buried my face in Lily's hair and squeezed her so hard she whimpered and twisted away from me. I made my arms go loose. I made myself breathe. Lily settled back down, still and heavy again with the amazing resilience of a sleeping child. And I just sat there in my brother's car, tears streaming down my face as the cold night blurred past my window. 4 years, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Leo, for 4 years, I know. His voice was tight, holding back an avalanche. He made me a cup of tea every single night. I pressed my knuckles hard against my lips. My jaw would not stop shaking. Every night for 4 years, he made it just how I liked it. He remembered I hated honey on Tuesdays because of my stomach issues. My voice just broke into pieces. It took me a few seconds to pull it back together. He was putting scopolamine in my tea for the last 3 weeks, and I drank it. I thanked him for it, Leo. I told him it was my favorite thing about being his wife. Chloe. My name cracked when he said it, like the ground breaking apart. He cleared his throat. I swear to God, I am going to make it my life's work to see that man never knows another peaceful day. Get in line, I said, and my own voice surprised me. It wasn't sad anymore. It was colder than that. It had a harder edge to it, the kind of temperature grief turns into when your job has taught you that damage is just the starting point. What you do next is what counts. Lily moved again. Her eyes opened, a little clearer now, as the sleep started to wear off. She looked up at me in the passing glow of the streetlights, her expression shifting from confusion to the simple fact that her mom was here, so everything was fine. "Mommy, you're crying," she said, reaching up to put her small warm hand flat on my cheek. The sound that came out of me was half a laugh and half the sharpest pain I have ever felt. "A little bit," I told her. "But I'm okay, sweetheart, I promise." "Did you get a boo-boo?" She was studying my face with that serious, intense look she saved for things she truly cared about. Not the kind of boo-boo that gets better with a kiss. I turned my head and kissed her palm. She smelled like lavender soap and that unique, warm scent of a sleeping child. I held on to that smell like it was a rope. Go back to sleep. We're almost at Grandpa Arthur's house. Her eyes shot open with the pure sudden joy that the name Grandpa Arthur always created. "With the dog?" "With the dog," Leo confirmed from the front seat, his voice rough with an emotion that wasn't there before. Lily made a happy little sound and tucked her face back into my shoulder. A minute later, her breathing evened out into the deep, slow rhythm of real sleep. I just stared out the window. The city lights were starting to spread out now, the tight grid of downtown giving way to the darker stretches of the highway. Somewhere back there, Ethan Cole was walking into his daughter's empty room. I looked at the back of my brother's head. "How many of Dad's lawyers are on call for us tonight?" "All of them," Leo said. "Every last one. This story is headed to places you cannot begin to imagine. To show you're still standing with Chloe, please comment with the number 1 below. And just a warning, the following scenes have been dramatized for the story. If this is too intense for you, this is your chance to stop the video. But if you're still here with me, let's get into the hardest part. The massive iron gates of the Sterling family estate swung shut behind us with a sound I felt in my chest before I heard it, a deep, final boom that said, "You are safe now. Whatever was chasing you cannot get to you here." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for hours. The main house was blazing with light. Every window on the first floor was lit up against the darkness, and I could see my father's silhouette in the foyer before the car even stopped. Leo came around and opened my door. I stepped out holding Lily, who had woken up on the main road and was now staring at the high-rise with huge sleepy eyes. To her, it wasn't about the drama, it was just Grandpa's apartment, a castle in the sky, filled with amazing things, and her cat was waiting inside. My father, Marcus Thorne, was standing right by the elevator. He didn't say a word at first. He's 65, with the rigid posture of a man who'd built half of this city without ever bending to anyone. But when he saw me standing there on his marble floor in cheap slippers and a raincoat, clutching his granddaughter, something in his face just broke. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and wrapped his arms around both of us, crushing us into his chest. He held on with the raw, desperate strength of a father who'd been listening to frantic, partial phone calls for hours, totally forgot to do anything for his child until this exact moment. "You're safe now," he whispered into my hair, his voice gravelly and broken. My own eyes started to burn as I buried my face into his shoulder. "Just hold on." "I'm safe, Dad." We stayed like that for maybe 4 seconds. Then Marcus pulled back, cleared his throat, kissed my forehead, and shifted into the gear I'd seen him use my whole life. The one that turns pain and fear into cold, hard action. "The doctor is waiting for you in the study," he said, taking Lily from me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mia immediately tugged on his blazer. "Grandpa, where's Jasper?" she asked, with that serious focus only a little girl can have. And Robert replied, "In the family room, waiting for you," with the calm I knew was costing him everything. He carried Mia inside, and I followed them in. A woman in navy scrubs met me by the library door, her medical bag already open. Her name tag read Dr. Eva Rostova. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice steady and professional. "This will be quick. Left arm, please." I sat on the arm of a wingback chair, automatically pushing up my sleeve. As the needle slid in, I heard Mia Esh shriek of "Jasper!" down the hall, followed by the deep, happy rumble of a cat thrilled to be back with his favorite human. That simple sound of safety stole the breath from my lungs. I bit my lip, forcing myself to breathe until the tightness passed. "All set," Dr. Rostova said, taping a cotton ball to my arm. "Results within 8 hours. Full toxicology screening." "6 if you can," I said. "Please," she held my gaze for a long moment. "6 it is," she promised. The library was now a command center. Arthur Vance sat at the enormous mahogany desk, 2 laptops open, a yellow legal pad filled with his handwriting, and a mug of coffee that was hours old. He was 55, a man who seemed to have stopped sleeping during his bar exam and just kept going. He peered at me over his glasses with an expression that said he'd been waiting for this exact war for years. "Claire," he said. "I want everything he has," I said, sinking into the chair opposite him. "His fund, his client list, his offshore holdings. Everything Ethan Sterling believes is his." Arthur slid one of the laptops over to me. I pulled it closer and started digging through the files. My father's team had been brutally efficient. 5 years of Ethan's trading activity, organized into perfect digital folders. I moved through them with the cold precision of a quant searching for a system's breaking point, unraveling it layer by layer to find the flaw in its design. It took me less than half an hour to find it. The heart of his fund. Keystone. The risk assessment algorithm his entire reputation was built on. The one he'd been licensing to the biggest investment banks in the world as his own creation. My creation. "Arthur," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm, perfectly level. He looked up immediately, because he knew that tone in a woman meant the fighting had truly started. The original partnership agreement. Section 7, Clause B. "Can we activate it tonight?" Arthur set his pen down. "Tell me what you've found." I turned the laptop so he could see the screen. "It's Keystone," I said. "I wrote the source code. He's been selling it as his, and tonight I'm shutting it down." Arthur read the licensing agreements twice over. He was the kind of lawyer who never did anything once if twice made it ironclad. I'd learned long ago that it was better to let him work than to hurry him. He scrolled down a page, then scrolled back up. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his tie, and put them back on. "The partnership agreement," he finally said. "Section 7, Clause B. You're positive the intellectual property assignment is defined there?" "I wrote that clause myself," I told him. My attorney back then called me paranoid. I told him I was being prepared. "There's a big difference." Arthur almost smiled. "Almost. Recite the exact wording for me." I did it from memory, the way you recite the fundamental constants of physics or the rules of calculus. Some facts you learn because you have to. Other facts you know because you engineered them yourself. All proprietary algorithms, predictive models, and software tools developed by Claire Ross prior to or during the partnership may be licensed to Sterling Capital on a royalty-free basis, subject to the sole discretion of the original creator. The license is revocable at any time for cause with written notice. Revocation is effective no more than 24 hours after the notice is delivered and confirmed. My father had walked into the library while I was speaking. He stood near the fireplace, his arms folded, and when I finished, he said, his voice thick with pride, "That's my girl." I felt my throat tighten and looked back at the screen before the emotion could break my composure. "Arthur," I said, "how fast can you get the revocation notice drafted?" "It's already drafted," Arthur said, turning the second laptop to face me. "I wrote it while you were driving over here." He paused. "I've been your family's lawyer for 30 years, Claire. I know how you operate." The document was elegant, precise, and absolutely devastating. It identified the Keystone algorithm by its patent registration number. It quoted our agreement chapter and verse. It listed all 16 of the billion-dollar funds currently reliant on the platform, from the sovereign wealth fund in Dubai to the pension plans in California that used it for their risk modeling. It declared in no uncertain terms that in 24 hours, every single license would be null and void, and any firm running Keystone would be in breach of contract. I read once, then unlocked my phone and sent a message to a number I hadn't touched in nearly 2 years. "Marco, it's Claire Sterling. I need you. It's time to activate the failsafe." The reply came in under a minute. Figured this day was coming. "I need 4 hours. I'll get you the server logs documenting every single change he made, every trapdoor he installed, every line of your original code he tried to pass off as his own. You'll have everything, Claire." There was a brief pause, then one more message. "I'm just sorry it took so long for someone to finally expose him. He's been claiming your work as his since he landed that first major client." Something inside me cracked open, not sadness, not quite victory, but the sharp, clean feeling of finally being believed by someone who knew the truth and had been forced to stand by and watch the lie. I placed my phone face down on the desk, pressed my palms flat against the cool wood, and took a long, slow breath. "He's in," I told Arthur. "Perfect." Arthur turned his laptop back around and added 2 more attachments, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm adding my firm's official legal notice and the signed partnership agreement as exhibits. This is going to Ethan S. corporate email, the legal departments for all 16 clients, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, all at the same time." He looked at me. "Do you want to review it one more time?" "No," I said. "I want it gone." Arthur just nodded. He spun the laptop to face me and positioned the cursor over the send button. Then he leaned back, leaving the last move to me, because he was the kind of man who understood that some battles must be won by the person who earned the victory. I clicked send. The timestamp on the monitor read 1:21 a.m. The email flew from my Outbooks, landing in 16 different corporate tuxes, 2 government servers, and one man's private account. In 24 hours, Ethan Sterling's entire financial empire would be effectively worthless. He had no clue, of course. He was somewhere on the other side of Chicago, probably pacing our empty condo, maybe calling his mistress in a panic, asking where I'd gone. He was doing all of that, completely unaware that the foundation of his entire life had just been turned to dust. I looked out the library window at the city lights. My reflection was a ghost in the glass, and beyond it was just the dark, endless night. "Enjoy the skyline, Ethan," I thought. "It's the last time you'll see it from the top." I slept for maybe 4 hours on the library sofa, my blazer pulled over me, my phone on the floor where I did feel it vibrate. At some point, my father Robert had come in and placed the proper blanket over me without waking me. The gesture was so typical of him, practical, silent, and completely understated that when I woke up and saw it, my eyes stung for a second before I blinked it away. It was 7:52 a.m. My phone displayed 81 notifications. I sat up, tapped the first one, then opened the app and saw what my husband Ethan Sterling had posted publicly at 5:30 this morning. While I was here sleeping, and our daughter Mia was in my old bedroom just down the hall. The picture was from our wedding. We were on the terrace of the art museum. Ethan in his perfect tuxedo, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist, the two of us laughing at something off camera. I remember that exact moment. My maid of honor, S. Toddler, had made a run for the wedding cake. We were trying not to completely lose it during the speeches. It was a real laugh, a truly happy moment, which made it the ideal weapon for what Ethan was doing. The caption read, "Last night, my pregnant wife, Claire, walked out of our home. She hasn't contacted anyone. She's been battling severe prenatal depression, and I'm terrified for her and our baby's safety. Clara, my darling, if you can see this, just know that I love you. Please come back. The house is empty without you." The news anchor looked on sympathetically. The public comments were a tidal wave of pity. "What a devoted husband. We're praying for you both. Mental illness is a tragedy." I was watching on the tablet when my brother Alex came in with tea. He saw my expression, took the tablet from my hands, watched the clip, and let out a string of curses that startled our cat, Jasper, from his nap. "Alex," I hissed, "Sophie's right in her room." "I know where Sophie is." Alex's face was grim, his knuckles white. He handed the tablet back. "He used your anniversary picture, Clara, the one from Paris. He's using that photo to sell a story that you've lost your mind." "I know, Alex, and you're not just going to let him—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "Just tell me you have a plan to hit back." "I'm going to hit back," I promised him. "But I'm not playing by his rules." Sophie's footsteps in the hall were our only warning. She padded in, wearing mismatched pajamas, her hair a wild mess. Jasper immediately hopped down to wind himself around her ankles. She looked between me and Alex with that uncanny radar that all 6-year-olds have for adult tension. "Why does Uncle Alex have a grumpy face?" she asked. "Uncle Alex is not grumpy at all," Alex said, his quick smile almost believable. "He was just thinking very hard about spreadsheets." "Come here, you little rascal." He lifted her into the air, and she giggled, tangling her fingers in his collar. I watched them, my heart a painful mix of love for them and utter despair. It was almost too much to hold. "Mommy," Sophie said. Now perched on Alex's hip, "I saw Daddy on Grandpa's TV. He was crying. Why was he on TV? The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis." I set my teacup down, walked over, and gently held Sophie's face. I focused everything I had into that one look. Her eyes were the same deep blue as Dominic's, a constant, painful reminder, and my love for her was a fire that burned through everything else. "Daddy is going through some grown-up problems," I said softly. "But that is not your worry. Your only mission is to go find Grandpa Richard and talk him into making his famous blueberry pancakes." Her eyes went wide. "With the special maple syrup? Go on. You're the only one he can't refuse." She immediately wiggled to be let down. Alex put her on her feet, and she and Jasper raced down the hall, a chaotic duo of joy that somehow shattered and mended my heart all at once. I turned back to Alex. "He wants me to make a statement, to fight him in the press." I shook my head. "That turns this into a spectacle. He wins that game. It stops being about the truth." I grabbed my phone. "I need you to trace the money behind this medical report he's waving around. Find the doctor." Alex came back to my workshop at 3 o'clock, laptop in hand, and his expression said it all. His face was stone, and his eyes had the cold fury of a forensic accountant who follows money trails to find the rot. "Got him," he said, setting the laptop on my workbench. "Dr. William Cole, a boutique clinic in Lincoln Park called Mindful Horizons. Very slick, lots of earth tones." He filed a complete psychiatric evaluation on you 6 weeks ago. He pointed to the screen. Claims you had 2 appointments, October 5th and October 19th. The dates hung there in the air. A cold shock radiated out from my heart. October 5th, I said. I was at the Art Institute of Chicago giving a lecture on restoring Renaissance-era canvases. There are dozens of photos of me at the podium. I was there all day. I know, Alex said quietly. I pulled the conference program, October 19th. My voice was hollowed out, completely empty. You and I drove Dad to his physical therapy appointment at Northwestern. We waited in the lobby for 2 hours. Then we went for deep dish pizza because he insisted, and you complained about the amount of cheese the entire time. Alex let out a sharp, joyless huff. That much cheese should be illegal, Clara. I know. I leaned on the workbench, my palms flat against the cool wood. I was not in Lincoln Park on October 19th. I was watching you poke at a pizza. I drew the laptop towards me and opened the full evaluation. So this Dr. Cole either invented this entire thing, or someone fed it to him. I began to read the symptoms, and the world just dissolved. The report listed everything in detached medical language. Persistent cognitive lapses, periods of intense irritability, debilitating fatigue, and difficulty focusing on my restoration work. My hands started shaking. It wasn't just nerves. It was a deep internal tremor. I knew every symptom on that list. I'd been feeling them for months, blaming long hours and the fumes in my studio. Alex, I whispered, my voice just a crackle. I don't understand. He was already typing, his face intent. Then he stopped. Oh my God. He turned his screen to me, a shell corporation owned by Dominic. It had a recurring payment to a chemical lab for something called aconite. I lurched away from the workbench, knocking over a stool. I couldn't sit. I couldn't be still. My vision blurred, and I couldn't seem to get enough air. I covered my mouth with my hands. He built the narrative before he created the facts. Alex. He documented the effects of the poison before he ever put it in my body. It was a strategy. I couldn't finish. Alex was there instantly, his hands firm on my arms, grounding me. The way you grab someone leaning too far over a ledge. Clara, listen to me, look at me. I forced myself to meet his gaze. It was blazing with a rage he was fighting to control, and his jaw was vibrating with tension. I had never seen my brother look like that in my entire life. He planned it, I rasped, saying it out loud to make it real. He mapped this out in his high-rise office like a real estate deal. He chose the poison. He bought the doctor. He invented the evidence. And every single night, he came home, kissed me goodnight, and asked how my restoration work was going. A sound ripped from my chest, half scream, half sob. He asked about my work, Alex, every night. My brother just pulled me into his arms and held on tight. There was nothing to say. I let myself fall apart in his arms for maybe a full minute, a raw, messy breakdown that I absolutely needed. Then I pushed back. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve. I grabbed the laptop. Ben needs everything, I said. Every file. And I want Dr. William Cole's name on every document we file with the court. Just then, my phone rang. It was Ben. Clara, he said, we have the tox screen results. You need to calm down. I was already walking toward the study before he finished, phone clamped to my ear. Come to the library, he said. Dr. Lin is here. She wants to walk you through her findings in person. I was halfway down the hall before we even hung up. The library felt claustrophobic. Or maybe I had expanded, filled up with this heavy, poisonous rage. Dr. Lin was sitting at the large oak desk, a file open in front of her. Ben stood next to her, his hands behind his back like an officer of the court. My father, Richard, was there too. He stood by the bookshelves, arms folded, his face looking impossibly grim and still. Just tell me, I said, my voice steady. Dr. Lin met my gaze with a calm, clear compassion, the look of a professional who knew that being direct was the only form of kindness that mattered now. Dot model, the hair analysis confirms chronic exposure to a complex neurotoxin. Dr. Chen said. They tested 3 centimeters. It shows a consistent low-dose pattern over roughly 21 days. 21 days. I counted backward automatically, my mind snapping open a calendar and filling the dates. 3 weeks ago, I almost fainted during Lily's ballet class, blaming it on exhaustion. The instructor had to help me to a chair. 3 weeks ago, I completely missed a major client presentation, one I built myself, and sent a bizarre, rambling apology I barely remember typing. 3 weeks ago, I told myself the dizzy spells and memory fog were just pregnancy brain. I had to get more rest. 21 days, I whispered. My voice was steady. That steadiness was the most terrifying thing in the room. The blood work also shows trace amounts from the last 48 hours, Dr. Chen added, which means he didn't stop. She met my eyes. He was still giving it to you the night you left. The tea, that special calming blend he always brought me, served with that gentle, concerned smile. The tea that sat getting cold on my nightstand while I climbed down fire escape in my socks, with my daughter asleep in my arms. Across the room, my father made a choked sound. It was small and tight, the noise someone makes when they take a punch they never saw coming. He turned to the window, one hand pressed against the glass, and just stood there, his back rigid. And I knew he was doing the same math I was, replaying all our calls from the past 3 weeks. The family dinners, the times he'd asked if I was okay, and I just said I was tired from work. "Dad," I began. "Just a moment, Chloe," he said, his voice thick and unfamiliar. "Just give me 1 moment." I gave it to him. I looked back at Dr. Chen. "Lily drank that tea with me sometimes," I said. My heart was a fist hammering against my ribs, against my throat. She would always ask for a sip from my mug. "I need her tested, please." "Right now." Dr. Chen was already on her feet. "I drew a precautionary sample from her last night, just in case," she said. "I put a rush on it the moment you mentioned the nightly tea. The results just came in with yours." She held my gaze. "Lily's tests are negative, Chloe. She is completely clean." The sound that came out of me wasn't human. It was a raw, ragged sob that ripped its way out. I gripped the back of a chair, bent over, and just let the relief tear through me. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. My legs gave out, and the relief was so huge, so violent. It felt exactly like being broken. "She's okay," I gasped out. "She's okay. She is 100% okay," Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle now. My father crossed the room and just laid a hand on the small of my back, a solid, grounding weight. I stayed hunched over that chair, just breathing, until the tremors stopped and were replaced by something else. Something cold and sharp and heavy. I pushed myself up. I wiped my eyes. I looked at Leo. "I want that entire toxicology report certified," I said. "Every page notarized. And I want the charges amended." I took a breath that burned. Marcus Vance wasn't planning to hurt me. He was actively poisoning me for 3 solid weeks. That's not conspiracy. It's not just an attempt. I picked up the folder from the table. "You add attempted murder to the file, Leo, because that's what this is." Leo started writing immediately, the pen scratching across his notepad. "Just one other thing," he said, not looking up from his notes. "The emergency restraining order was approved an hour ago. He can't come within 1,000 feet of you or Lily." He put the pen down. "And Chloe, 3 of his biggest collectors have already voided their acquisition contracts this morning. The word is getting out." I stared at the report in my hands. 21 days. A block of time that would forever be a scar. "Good," I said. "Don't stop." I had designed the cybersecurity for our Lincoln Park penthouse myself, years before Marcus and I even got married. It was a professional tick, the reflex of someone whose entire career is built on anticipating threats, on what happens to valuable assets when no one is watching. The central node was a custom build, a sleek, sculptural piece of brushed metal on the bookshelf that looked like modern art. It was a convenience Marcus never bothered to examine closely enough to spot the pinhole camera integrated into the design. I opened my laptop and pulled up the secure server. I hadn't looked at the live feed since the night I ran. I wasn't ready to see that space as a crime scene. But this morning, I was. The feed took a few seconds to connect, then the image snapped into focus. Isabella Rossi was on my sofa. She was curled into my corner of the sectional, shoes off, legs tucked beneath her like she'd done it 1,000 times. She was wearing an expensive-looking silk blouse, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. She was holding a mug, lifting it to her lips with an easy grace that screamed ownership. It was the hand-thrown ceramic mugs with the small crack near the rim. My mug, the one I'd bought on our first trip together. The one I drank my morning tea from every single day. The one that had moved with me through 3 different apartments before this one. My throat felt like it was closing up. Marcus walked in from the master bedroom. He wore that soft gray sweater he always changed into after a long day, the one with the tiny snag on the sleeve from Lily S. Kitten 2 years ago. He sat next to Isabella on the sofa. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder in a gesture so familiar it had to be muscle memory. In my home, on my couch, while I was fighting for my life. She's gone completely dark, Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. No social media, no press release. Nothing. That's S not good, that's S worse, Isabella replied. She set my mug down on our coffee table directly on the antique wood, leaving a ring. I felt a flash of rage so intense it was almost dizzying. Of all the betrayals, that one felt so personally insulting. Silence means she is building a war machine. Who's in her corner? Her father, her brother. Marcus S. voice was tight, trying to project control but failing, and Leo Sterling. Isabella sat up straight at that. Sterling, the corporate litigator? Yes, Marcus, she snapped, all the soft charm gone from her voice. That is very, very bad. Sterling doesn't handle divorces. He dismantles empires. Marcus pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. I am aware. Then we have to get out ahead of it, she insisted. We need to frame the narrative, leak a story. Find a former colleague, a rival, anyone who will say she's always been erratic, that she was on the verge of a breakdown for years. She grabbed his wrist, her voice urgent. You have to paint her as unstable before she has a chance to show anyone a single piece of paper. And what if she already has something? Marcus S. voice was slow, and a chill went down my spine. It was the sound of regret. It was the sound of a man running damage calculations. Isabella just scoffed. What could she possibly have? She fled in the middle of the night with a child in her arms. She has her family's lawyers and a broken heart. That's all. She picked my mug back up and took a long, slow sip. There is nothing she can throw at us that we can't spin. My hand was shaking as I moved it over the laptop's trackpad, but it wasn't from sadness. It wasn't even pure anger anymore. It was the cold, electric clarity that comes when someone underestimates you on a catastrophic level. She didn't know about the toxicology report. She didn't know about the collectors. She didn't know about Leo Sterling or the calls he was making to the district attorney's office. And she definitely didn't know that every word she was saying was being recorded in high-definition audio and routed to an encrypted server right here in my father's study. She thought I was a victim. She had no idea I was the one hunting now. I clicked the record button and saw the tiny green light flash on screen. Then I turned to my brother, Liam, who was standing behind me, staring at the feed over my shoulder. He looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Liam, I said, my voice perfectly level. I need you to find the best document and manuscript forger in Chicago. I need someone who can replicate 5 rare texts in the next 72 hours, with such perfect accuracy that no one could spot the fake without a carbon dating analysis. Liam just blinked. He looked from the laptop screen back to me. Isabella had just casually pushed Lily S. stuffed unicorn off the sofa and onto the floor. A dark, furious expression crossed his face. "I'll have a name for you within the hour," he said. The forger Liam found was based out of a studio in Lincoln Park. A woman named Helene Richter, who'd spent 2 decades creating flawless replicas for auction houses and insurance claims. When Liam showed me her portfolio, I saw a copy of a 16th century illuminated manuscript and felt a surge of pure professional admiration. The calligraphy was perfect. The way she had aged the vellum showed a level of skill that was nothing short of genius. "Tell her I need 5 pieces ready by Thursday," I said. "I'll send the label photos over tonight. I need the replicas to look aged, not just printed old, truly vintage." I hung up. Marcus would get it. While Leo was out charming investors, I went to the sub-basement to the climate-perfect vault holding my father's wine collection. 150 bottles, gathered over a lifetime by a man who trusted his own taste, not the critics. I stood there in the dim, cool air, and the ache I felt was deeper than the raw pain of the last few weeks. It was a quieter, older grief. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered to the silent seller. "I swear I'll protect what you built." Then I opened my laptop. My work email is one Leo could never access, but my personal one he'd insisted on a shared calendar years ago, a move I'd once found charming. I drafted an email to our family's estate lawyer. I attached a photo from the winter inventory, cropping it carefully to show only the rarest bottles. Then I wrote the message, thinking about finally getting Dad's collection properly valued. Some of these could be worth fortune now. I put the lawyer's name in the send field and my own in the blind copy. I hit send. Then I shut the laptop and walked away, refusing to check if he'd seen it. Because that would mean admitting what I was doing, using my father's legacy as the bait in a trap for the man who was bleeding our family dry. Marcus came in holding a tablet. He had that look, the one that meant bad news, that was actually good news for our plan. "That tech incubator just pulled his Series A funding," he said. "And Clara, the quarterly reports are out. 3 major backers bailed this morning: Lakeside Ventures, Innovate Capital, and Sterling Group." He showed me the investment figures on the screen. Those 3 firms made up almost 80% of his operating capital. I just looked at the number. "He'll be desperate by nightfall," I said. "He's already there," Marcus said, pulling up the live feed from our condo. The apartment looked gray in the afternoon gloom. Leo was pacing, something I had never seen him do. Leo was always so careful to project stillness. Stillness was power. Pacing was a cage. Sophie was on the couch, watching him with the focused gaze of someone realizing how bad things truly were. 3 backers in one morning," Leo was saying, his voice thin and fast. "This is not a coincidence. Someone's targeting me." "It's Clara," Sophie said flatly. "It has to be. She doesn't have those kinds of connections." But his voice broke on the word connections in a way that told me he wasn't so sure. It meant, deep down, he always knew I wasn't just some society wife. He knew what my family was capable of. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He grabbed it. He read the screen, and I watched his face cycle through 3 emotions in about 4 seconds. Confusion, then dawning recognition, and finally, something my trained eye knew it instantly, was pure greed. "Clara just emailed the estate lawyer," he said slowly. Sophie moved to look at the screen. Her eyes went wide. A full valuation of the seller. She looked up at him. "How much value are we talking?" "Her father's collection," Leo said quietly, as if he were adding it up in his head. "The last time it was informally appraised, the lot was valued at just over 3 million. The greed on his face wasn't subtle anymore. It was right on the surface. Sophie's hands tightened on his arm. "Leo," she whispered, 3 million fixes everything. The loans, the debt, all of it. We could just leave." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at his phone. "I need to find out where she keeps the inventory records." I watched it all from my study, my hands folded on the desk, my breathing perfectly even. The bait was in the water. The hook was set. I felt the exact moment it caught. Marcus, I said, call the wine vault. Tell them to have the fake manifest ready by morning. The forger delivered the 12 counterfeit cases on Wednesday, wrapped in excelsior and packed in perfect wooden crates. His care told me he knew the value of what he was handling, even if he didn't know why. I met him at the surface entrance myself. When I opened the first crate, the bottle inside stole my breath. It was my father's favorite, a rare pre-war Burgundy. The label was faded just so, the glass having that specific imperfection from a bygone era, the kind of bottle that rewards a long, careful look. The forger's replica was so close to the original that the professional in me automatically started searching for the tiny differences, the tells that separate real from fake. It took me longer than it should have. This is extraordinary work, I said. The forger was a small man in his 60s with ink-stained thumbs and the quiet manner of someone who no longer needed compliments. The corks were the real challenge, he said. Getting the branded seal right took most of Tuesday, but I think they'll pass. They'll pass, I said. Thank you. Once he was gone, I took the fakes to the estate's secondary cellar and opened my kit. Inside were the micro-trackers, each the size of a peppercorn sealed in wax, designed to look like an old seller tag. I developed the system years ago on a university grant meant to stop the theft of rare manuscripts. These tags use GPS, pressure sensors, and motion detectors to know when an item is moved or opened. Once triggered, they broadcast the item's location and a case number non-stop. With this same focus I used for handling a priceless vintage, I attached each tag to the neck of a bottle, hidden under a replica inventory string. My breathing was steady, my hands were rock solid. Julian showed up in the doorway as I started on the fourth bottle. He watched me silently for a moment, which for him meant he was paying very close attention. Then he said, "Your father designed the first version of this system. Did I ever mention that?" "You told me," I answered, not looking up. "You showed me his plans when I was 12. He would have liked this," Julian said softly. His voice held this mix of pride and sadness, and I just pressed my lips together and kept working. The day before, I'd driven to the Chicago PD to meet with Detective Miller from the Major Crimes Unit. He was in his 40s, precise, and had that look of someone who'd seen too much justice arrive too late. I put the tracker tag and the file on Leo's fraud on the table, and he read it all without a word. Then he looked right at me. "So you're telling me you intend to be the main witness," he said. "I'm telling you I already am the evidence," I replied. "I just need a warrant ready and your team on standby. These trackers give you a location, a suspect, and a documented crime, all in real time. You just have to be ready to act." He sized me up for a second, trying to decide if I was brilliant or just incredibly reckless. Then he simply said tracker IDs. I slid the list of serial numbers over to him, and he started writing. The fake inventory list our contact had made showed the right wine titles and values, but pointed to a dummy storage unit on a lower empty floor. The actual fakes were stored in a secure locker under my name, and the real collection? It was already deep in a bank vault downtown, safe until this whole mess was over. Leo showed up at the wine facility on Thursday morning at 9:47. The manager called me the second he saw the name. "He's claiming to be your representative," he said, his voice low. I told him I couldn't grant access without your direct word, but offered to show him the public manifest. He was here for 11 minutes. Photographed every single page. "Perfect," I said. "Did he look sure of himself?" There was a pause. He looked like a man who believed all his problems were about to disappear. I thanked the manager and ended the call. For the next 36 hours, Marcus and I camped out in the study, watching the camera feeds in shifts. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, like we were watching a patient through a critical illness. Then Friday morning at 7:38, the exterior camera caught a dark van pulling into the rear service lane. Marcus was on watch. He came and knocked twice on the study door or signal. I was already on my feet. On the screen, a man in dark clothes got out, carrying a large padded crate. He moved fast, with no hesitation at all. He walked like someone who had practiced this moment. At the rear entrance, he lifted a keycard to the electronic reader. My keycard, which he'd cloned from my wallet months ago when he pretended to help me find my keys. He pressed it to the scanner. The door clicked open. "Detective Miller," I said into my phone. "He's going in." He was inside for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. I know, because I counted every single one. The internal cameras showed him moving through the lower level with the cool efficiency of someone who had memorized the layout, which he had. For 3 days, he pored over that fake manifest, mapping a route through the fire escape, totally avoiding the front desk. He'd really prepared. Funny, for a man who couldn't be bothered to read instructions for anything. In our 4 years of marriage, Caleb Thorne could be meticulous when the price was right. I watched on the monitor as he picked the locks on 3 different storage units, his tool looking shiny and new. I saw him gently wrap each canvas in microfiber cloths from his bag. He moved fast, but not sloppy, treating them with the reverence of someone who grew up around art. The irony was a punch to the gut. He handled my mother's fake art with more care than he ever showed my mother's actual daughter. 7 minutes, 23 seconds. That's all it took. He zipped up the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and was out the fire door and into the SUV. "He's moving," Dominic said from the library window where we had the command center running. His voice was deadpan, his professional tone, the one that meant he was burying his emotions deep. South, toward the waterfront. I already had my phone out. "Agent Reeves, he's mobile. Dark SUV, south on Tremont." Her voice came back, cool and steady. "We see him. We've had eyes on him the whole time. We're letting him complete the transaction." "We need the handoff on record," she added. "Got it," I replied. "The chips inside will signal the second they're sold." I hung up and brought the GPS tracker live on my laptop. There they were, 5 green dots, moving in a tight cluster south through the city. I've spent 11 years staring at tracking screens, but this was the Nano Sentinel system I designed, tracking these exact paintings for this very purpose. The feeling was hard to place. It wasn't victory, not yet. It was the moment just before, like the tense quiet before a storm breaks. Dominic pulled up the other camera feed. The buyer's warehouse down on the harbor was a classic grey market spot, not quite illegal, but just outside the official art world. Marcus Webb was the kingpin there. I knew all about him. In my line of work, you know the guys who specialize in moving questionable art. Our inside camera feed was crystal clear because I'm the one who installed their security system 4 years back. And you know what? They never bothered to change the master password from the default I gave them. Marcus Webb was already inside, waiting when Caleb arrived. Webb was a large man in his 60s who sized up everything as if he was putting a price tag on it. He watched Caleb set the duffel on a velvet-covered table, giving off the vibe of a man who bills by the second. "Show me," he grunted. Caleb unzipped the bag, revealing the first painting. Marcus took out a jeweler's loupe, getting close to inspect the canvas. His face was a mask, but he leaned in just a fraction, a professional habit I knew well. It's what I do when I spot real value. 4.2, Marcus stated, was the set. "These are worth 5 million at auction," Caleb countered. His voice was strained, but he was keeping his composure. "I need 3.8. Marcus straightened up. "No, you need a buyer who keeps his mouth shut. That's the real product here. 3.5. Take it or leave it." I saw Caleb's jaw tighten on the monitor, even from 40 blocks away. A cold, clean feeling washed over me. Not grief, not even rage. just the simple precision of a trap snapping shut. 3.5, Caleb said. They shook hands. On my laptop screen, 5 green dots instantly flashed a deep, angry red. An alert window filled the screen. Nano Sentinel Tier 1 alert. Unauthorized transfer confirmed. Location, 14 Harbor Industrial Way, Boston. Suspect, biometric confirmed. Owner's name, Briar Ella Vance. Notifications sent to the FBI Art Crime Team and Boston PD Financial Crimes. Case ID BOSFFC2041018. My phone buzzed before the alert even faded. Agent Reeves was all business. We're moving in. I could hear the tactical team in the background, a storm of muffled noise through the phone. Behind me, Dominic finally exhaled a long, ragged sound. Briar, he said, his voice thick with emotion he'd suppressed for months ever since that night I climbed out a window in my slippers. It's done? He's done? I just watched the 5 red dots on the map. Each one, a painting my mother had selected. Each one was a homing beacon, signaling Caleb Thorne's precise location to the feds. My system was built to protect what I valued most. Yes, I whispered, he is. The confirmation call came at 3:52 p.m. Dominic had gone for coffee and came back carrying 2 mugs, his phone, and a strange new expression. Not shock. It was the look of a runner who had just crossed a finish line and collapsed. They have him, he said. Caleb and Marcus Webb, both in custody. He told me they'd recovered all 5 paintings and stopped the wire transfer cold. He set a mug down in front of me so carefully, like it was the only thing he could focus on. It's over, Briar. I stared at the mug, at my hands. I always imagined this would feel like a tidal wave of relief. That first desperate breath after being held underwater for too long. But it was quieter, heavier. Like setting down a burden you've carried for so long your bones have grown around it, and now you have to figure out how to stand up straight without it. What about Jessica? I asked. She wasn't there, Dominic said, but Reeves confirmed they got Caleb's phone. Encrypted messages between them go back 14 months. He sat down, facing me. They're picking her up tonight. At that moment, Arthur came into the library. He had the kind of quiet that says I was listening outside the door and I'm done hiding it. He just looked at me for a second, his eyes shining. He came over and cupped my face in his big, warm hands, just like when I was a kid, and he kissed my forehead. It's finally over, he whispered, his voice thick. Not yet, I said, but I let myself rest in his hands for exactly 3 seconds. I needed them. I'd paid for them. 40 minutes later, Silas arrived. He was carrying a manila folder stretched to its limit by a rubber band. He dropped it on the table and sat down with me and Dominic. He had the grim look of a man about to present a very, very large bill. The forensic accountants wrapped up their report this afternoon, he began. I have to go over their findings with you before we file. Some of this is a lot. Go ahead, I told him. Silas opened the folder. Between January of last year and this August, Caldwell Galleries made 23 suspicious wire transfers. They ranged from $40,000 to $110,000 each. The grand total? $1.5 million. He flipped the page. Every last cent went to a single bank account owned by an LLC named JR Consulting. I knew what JR stood for at the exact same moment Dominic did. I heard him gasp. JR, I said flatly. Jessica Reynolds. Jessica Ann Reynolds, Silas corrected. The only registered owner. She set up the shell company 18 months ago in Delaware. The LLC has no website, no public filings, no customers, nothing. Its only purpose was to receive that money. He put the document down, his eyes meeting mine over his glasses. $1.5 million, Briar. Siphoned from the gallery's profits and paid directly to his mistress. From the gallery that runs on gem trays, the system you built. The money my work generated was funneled by my husband straight into her pocket, using a loophole he built just for her. My chest seized up with something that wasn't quite grief, and wasn't purely rage either. It was the sickening clarity of realizing the true size of the betrayal, like restoring a masterpiece one tiny brushstroke at a time, only to step back and see the full, hideous image. Where did the money go from there? I asked. Silas turned a page. Most of it was consolidated to buy property. A 4,000 square foot penthouse on Beacon Hill. Price tag $1.2 million. All cash. The title was in both their names, Caleb Thorne and Jessica Reynolds. He paused, letting it sink in. The deed was filed this March. March, 8 months ago. While I was in the lab for 16 hours a day, finishing that massive restoration for the Met, calling him every night, and he'd tell me he was so proud of me that he was keeping my dinner warm. While I was doing all that, he was signing the deed to their new home. A sound broke from my throat, not a cry, not a laugh, just a sharp, brittle crack. The sound of something snapping. Dominic's hand shot across the table and gripped mine hard. The pain was grounding, something real to focus on. How many more charges is that? I asked, my voice flat. I forced it to be flat. Corporate embezzlement. Silas said, counting on his fingers. Wire fraud. Money laundering, thanks to the shell company. And this is all just icing on the cake. David is pushing for conspiracy charges, Olivia. This is way past a marital dispute. It's fraud. It's a criminal enterprise. Good, I said. Do it. File everything. Every bank statement, every email. All the evidence we have from the investigator, every file the doctor gave us. I want Marcus's entire scheme laid out on the prosecutor's desk by Monday. It's being couriered over now, David promised me. My phone vibrated on the polished wood. I glanced down. Catherine Vance. I just let it buzz. 3 rings, 4, 5. Her name glowed on the screen, a ghost at the feast. The woman who called me her perfect daughter at every charity gala for 4 years. The woman who picked up Marcus's dry cleaning and organized his sock drawer and told him which stocks to buy. I stared at her name and felt absolutely no warmth for her. The ringing finally stopped. I turned the phone over, screen down. What time does the prosecutor's office open in the morning? I asked. 9 o'clock, David said. Then I want that entire package on his desk by 8:45, I told him. Not a single page out of place. The gate buzzer rang at 10:16 the next morning. I was in the sunroom with a lukewarm tea, reading through the final witness list with David when our head of security, a calm former cop named Garrett, appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Vance is at the main gate, he said. She walked here. There's no car. She has just been standing there on the pavement for the last 20 minutes. I looked up from the document. David simply arched an eyebrow. Is she by herself? I asked. Yes, ma'am. I considered it for all of 3 seconds. Then I said, let her in. Take her to the formal living room. And Garrett, give me a minute before you bring her inside. He gave a slight nod and was gone. I slipped a hand into my sweater pocket, quietly started my phone's recorder app, and slid it back in, leaving the mic exposed. David saw the whole thing. The edge of his mouth pulled up, not quite a smile, but it felt like approval. I'll be in the study if you need anything, he said, collecting his papers. Stay close, I replied. The woman who walked into the living room a minute later was not the Catherine Vance I had known for 4 years. That Catherine was sharp, always in tailored suits, a woman who controlled conversations with her steel trap memory and cutting remarks. This woman, however, looked like she'd been up all night weeping. Her eyes were puffy and red, her hair was a wreck, and she was wearing an expensive coat that was buttoned wrong, making it hang lopsided. Her hands were trembling so badly. She had to press them together to try and stop the shaking. She saw me standing by the fireplace, and her entire face just seemed to crumble. Olivia, she said, her voice a raw, broken whisper. Please, I know I have no right to come here. I truly know that, but I had no one else to go to. Sit down, Catherine, I said. I used her first name deliberately, killing the Mrs. Vance formality. I wanted her to understand that old power structure between us was officially dead, There's water on the coffee table. She sat down but didn't touch the glass. She just put her hands on her knees and stared at me with these wounded, swollen eyes. The look of someone who had seen something horrible and couldn't get the image out of her head. "He's my only son," she said. "I know what he's done. I know everything now. The other woman, the forged art appraisals, the money, all of it. And I know you have every single reason to want him destroyed." Her voice cracked, and she bit down on her lower lip to steady herself. "But I am begging you, as a woman to another woman, as a mother to a woman who is about to become a mother. You know what it is to love a child so fiercely it just erases everything else. I'm asking you for mercy." "Tell me what you knew," I said. She visibly flinched. "Catherine," I said again, my voice perfectly level, my expression a mask. "You walked all the way to my home. You stood outside my gate for 20 minutes. If you are here asking me for a favor, you will give me the truth, all of it. What did you know, and for how long?" She squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, the act was over. All that was left was a person who was tired, ashamed, and suddenly looked 10 years older. "He told me about the real estate deal collapsing last winter," she said. "I knew about the massive debt. I knew about Chloe. I actually encouraged him because Chloe was easy. She didn't have your family's influence. I thought Marcus needed someone who would just admire him more than you did." She paused, and the shame on her face was impossible to miss. "That was so wrong of me. I see that now. It was a terrible thing to do." "Keep talking," I said. "He told me about his plan back in September." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Not the details. He just said he was going to get you some help, that you seemed unwell, that you needed to be somewhere quiet to rest for a bit. He told me he had a doctor who would sign the papers." She looked away, staring at her hands. "I asked him if the clinic was nice. I asked if it was a 5-star facility, and he swore that it was. And I chose to believe him because I wanted to." She was crying now, but quietly, just tears sliding down her face, without any of the drama of someone performing their sadness. This was real. This was a woman finally admitting her own lies to herself, seeing the huge gap between her own story and the actual truth. "He mentioned the prescription once," she said, "and that was it, the line that sealed it all. He said he had to get the dosage perfect, that it had to be slow enough to look natural. I told him to be careful. I told him not to overdo it." Her voice was barely audible. "I thought it was just a strong sedative, something to make you sleep. I didn't realize what he was truly." She stopped, unable to say the word. "I didn't let myself realize." The 6 words that explain the difference between knowing a truth and being willing to face it. "Catherine," I said, very slowly, "I need you to understand me. What you just confessed, that you were aware of a specific dosage, that you advised him to be careful, that you knew about the plan to have me committed. That isn't being unaware. That makes you an accomplice." I watched every last bit of color disappear from her face. "You're going to have to speak to a lawyer. Not David, someone else. Someone who will represent your interests, not my family's. You should probably make that phone call today." She just gaped at me, her mouth working but no words coming out. Are you telling me that I'm going to be charged?" "I'm telling you to get a lawyer," I said. Today, she looked as if the floor had just dropped out from under her. She was completely still for what felt like forever. Then she began to cry again, but it was a different sound. This time it was a low, steady weeping, the sound of a person who finally understands there's no way out of the mess without being completely broken. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Olivia, it's David," he said when I stepped into the hall. "I just heard from Marcus's legal team. Marcus wants to see you before the arraignment. He's asking for a one-on-one meeting." I glanced back through the archway at Catherine Vance, who hadn't moved at all, just sobbing into her palms. Then I focused on my phone again. "Set it up," I said, "through official channels only. I want both of our legal teams present. and a full video record of the entire meeting. And David? I want the final toxicology report in my hands before I walk into that room. The meeting room at the Northwood County Jail had that smell of bleach and old coffee. The walls were cinder block, painted that awful, depressing shade of institutional beige that's meant to make you feel nothing. The heavy steel table was bolted right into the concrete floor. The chairs were flimsy plastic, and I felt mine creak a bit when I sat. David was on my right. Marcus's lawyer, a guy named Reed, who looked like he knew he was defending a losing case, sat across from me. Between us, the table felt 100 feet wide. The door at the end of the room buzzed open, and a guard brought Marcus in. He'd lost a lot of weight. His face looked thin and sharp, his jawline more pronounced, and he had this patchy stubble, the kind men grow when they just give up. He was wearing the standard issue bright orange jumpsuit. He looked so different from the man who had brought me chamomile tea just over a week ago, and yet he looked exactly the same, because the person underneath it all was the same. And I finally saw him clearly. Catherine Vance was already in there, sitting on a chair against the wall. She was here at Reed's suggestion, I'm sure, some sad attempt to show a united family front. She sat bolt upright, her hands folded tight in her lap, her eyes glued to the table. She never looked at me, not even once. Marcus sat. He just stared at me for a long moment. His eyes were bloodshot, the eyes of someone who hasn't slept or who has been crying, or maybe both. He put his hands flat on the cold steel table and took a big, showy breath, like an actor preparing for a big monologue he'd practiced over and over. Olivia, he started, I know you don't want to hear anything from me, but I have to say this. I need you to know that I see what I did, what I almost did, and I am sorrier than I have ever been for anything in my entire life. Tell me, I said. He blinked, thrown off. He had obviously planned for a much longer speech before I would ever say a word. The debt was suffocating me. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't think straight. And Jessica kept saying it was the only way out, that it was so simple. She got inside my head, Sarah. I know how that sounds, but she was the one who pushed me. She found the doctor. She drew up the papers to have you committed, all of it. What about the pills? I asked. He looked at me, and I could see him straining, trying to project pure sincerity. I bought them. Okay, I did that part. But I never used them. I swear I couldn't go through with it. They just sat in my bedside table drawer, and every day I'd look at them and I couldn't do it. I couldn't hurt you. His voice caught on the last line, a perfectly practiced moment. I need the prosecutor to know that. I need that on the record. I came up with a terrible plan, and I took things way too far, but I never actually drugged my wife. He looked straight at me when he said it, his eyes shining with unshed tears, held back with the perfect control of a seasoned liar. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the lab results, already folded to the right page. I flattened it on the table between us. Then I spun it around to face him and pushed it across the cold steel. Page 4, I said. Item 3. He glanced down. His lawyer Reed leaned over to see. The line read, Hair follicle analysis shows chronic exposure to zopiclone, compounded to be tasteless. The sample length shows continuous dosing over a period of at least 30 days. Blood work confirms exposure within the last 24 hours. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, charged with a silence that was deafening. 30 days, I said. A full month. The blood test proves you were still slipping it to me the night before I left. I watched his face as my words hit him. I watched those perfectly rehearsed tears finally spill, not from guilt, but from the shock of being caught with no escape route. You just swore you couldn't do it. I picked up the report and folded it crisply. You didn't hesitate, Liam. You were doing it for a month, in my morning coffee, every single day. He couldn't even form a sentence. That test is wrong. It has to be The test was run by a top forensic lab using standards admissible in any court in the country, my brother Ethan said beside me, his voice low and steady, with the kind of authority that doesn't need to be loud. The chain of custody is flawless. It will stand up to any scrutiny you throw at it. Liam's lawyer was already scribbling on his legal pad, his writing sharp and tight, like a general redrawing his plans after a devastating attack. Liam was just silent. His whole defense was built on one lie, that the pills never left the bottle, and I had just leveled it with a single sheet of paper. From her chair by the wall, his mother Eleanor made a sound, a tiny, sharp gasp, like a string snapping under too much tension. At some point, she had placed a hand on Liam's arm, a small gesture of solidarity. Now, I watched her pull it away, very slowly. No drama. She just retracted her hand, folded it in her lap, and stared at the tiled floor. Liam saw it happen. I watched his face crumble as he understood what that meant. I stood. I placed the lab report back in my briefcase, clicked the latches shut, and pushed in my chair. I looked at Liam one last time across the table. I have a feeling the district attorney is going to find this report very interesting, I said. Then I turned, walked out, and never looked back. A bitter wind was blowing off the lake the morning the trial began. It wasn't a dramatic, moody storm, just that soul-crushing Chicago gray that bleeds the color from everything. I stood on the courthouse steps for a minute before heading inside. Not for a big emotional moment, but just to feel the cold bite at my skin. I wanted to choose to walk into that room, not be dragged there by fate. I wore a simple navy blue dress I'd had for years, professional and plain. My hair was pulled back. I wore no jewelry at all. The pell mark on my wrist where his anniversary bracelet used to be had finally faded a few weeks ago. Now, the absence just felt like strength. I didn't need his gifts to know who I was. The courtroom was packed. The case had all the elements the press drools over. Old family money, a shocking betrayal, a pregnant wife, and a plot to have her committed. 3 news vans were already parked out front. I walked right past them without slowing down, and my brother Ethan, who was right behind me, is big enough and has a scowl that makes reporters think twice about shoving a camera in my face. We took our seats in the front row, right behind the prosecution's table. Ethan gave my hand a quick squeeze under the table. That was it. That was all the encouragement I needed. I sat down next to our lawyer, placed my hands on the table, and looked straight ahead. They brought Liam in 5 minutes later. He was allowed to wear his own clothes for the trial. Someone had brought him an expensive charcoal suit that fit perfectly, though he'd lost so much weight it hung loose around his shoulders. He looked, on the surface, like the man I married. He had the same posture, that controlled, confident way he held himself. But his eyes were different, so different I could see it from across the courtroom. They were vacant, that unique emptiness of a man who has played his last card and is just waiting for the table to be cleared. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Evelyn Reed, who spoke with the calm precision of someone who never took on a case she couldn't win, stood to read the charges. 6 counts: conspiracy to commit aggravated kidnapping, attempted assault, wire fraud for faking my medical records, and 2 counts of reckless endangerment for me and our unborn child. Each charge hit the silent courtroom like a hammer blow. I felt them all, one by one. The sheer, calculated cruelty of what he had planned for the woman carrying his son. Liam's defense lawyer tried his best. He tried to paint a picture of a man crumbling under extreme business pressure and a temporary, tragic error in judgment. He spun a tale of a developer crushed by debt who made a terrible choice. He was a good lawyer with a hopeless case, and the jury looked at him with that polite, vacant stare of people who were just waiting for the inevitable. Evelyn Reed took his entire defense apart during cross-examination with just 3 questions. She proved the plan involved months of careful preparations, across 3 different cities, including bribing a lab technician, forging signatures on legal documents, and setting up a series of shell companies to hide his real estate assets. Does that, she asked the jury in her closing remarks, sound like a man who just snapped under pressure? Or does it sound like the cold, methodical work of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way? The defense attorney had nothing to say to that. He just sat down. Jessica Croft was the last witness they called. She had taken a plea deal for her full testimony and she was dressed for the part. A simple gray sweater, no makeup, the very picture of remorse. She sat in the witness box and answered every question in a quiet, steady voice that gave nothing away. Miss Croft, the prosecutor asked, in your own words, what was the goal of this plan as Liam described it to you? Jessica looked at the jury, not at Liam. She said, he told me that once Sarah was declared incompetent, her shares in the company and her entire trust would be under his control. He said we'd liquidate everything and move to Monaco. She paused. He said it like he was booking a flight. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. In the row behind me, I heard my brother Ethan take a deep, shaky breath. I didn't look at Liam while Jessica was speaking. I just watched the jury's faces as they processed what they were hearing. I watched their expressions move from disbelief to comprehension, and finally to cold, hard certainty. And I thought about the woman I was 5 years ago at a groundbreaking ceremony, who thought a man who spoke so passionately about building legacies must be a good man. The jury went out to deliberate at 11:30 in the morning and came back at 2:15. The foreperson was a man in his 50s who read the verdict without a trace of emotion, as if he were reading a weather report, on all 6 counts, guilty. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. The DA had argued he was a flight risk with access to millions in offshore accounts, and the judge agreed. The verdict landed that afternoon, feeling like the inevitable end of a story already written. Julian Thorne was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole and ordered to pay $5 million in restitution. His mistress Amelia received 8 years. The foreman was stripped of his license and got 3. The half-finished waterfront mansion was to be seized by the government. Thorne Industries was turned over to the bankruptcy court to be liquidated. When the judge said 25 years, Julian made a sound. It was so small and it escaped him a single, bitten-off noise that held the complete collapse of every single thing he had ever planned, built, and lied for. He didn't look at me. He looked out at the gallery at the back row where his mother was sitting, and the look on his face is something I won't ever try to describe. Some things just can't be put into words. He looked like a man who had finally completely understood what he'd done and knew he could never take it back. Mrs. Thorne sat in the last row on the far left. She was staring down at her lap. She didn't look up when the sentence was read. She didn't look up at all. The bailiff crossed the courtroom and fastened handcuffs on Julian's wrists. The click of the metal locking was clean and loud in the room's sudden silence. They led him out a side door. He passed within 4 feet of where I sat, close enough that I could have reached out. His head was down, his pace was steady, and then, for just a fraction of a second, his step faltered. It was a single, tiny hesitation so small that only someone who knew the way he walked could have possibly seen it. Then he kept going, and the heavy door opened and he was gone. I sat for a moment after the room began to move again, after the noise from the gallery and the lawyers and the reporters returned. I sat there and said goodbye to something, but not to Julian. That goodbye had already happened the night I found his second phone and my marriage shattered into pieces around me. What I was saying goodbye to now was the version of myself who had needed that marriage in order to feel whole. The woman who had measured love in stock prices and public appearances and had never once thought to check what the company was actually built on. She was gone. I knew it the way you know when a project is finally finished. Not with some big party, but with the quiet certainty of looking at a completed thing and just recognizing it for what it is. I stood up, gathered my bag, and walked toward the door. My brother Leo and his business partner, Marcus, were waiting on the courthouse steps in the rain. Marcus had his collar turned up against the wet, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. And when he saw me come through the doors, he crossed to me in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around me so hard I felt my back pop. He said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Leo stood a step back and watched us, his hands at his sides, his jaw working. When Marcus finally let go, he cupped my face in his hands. He studied me for a long moment, the way he always did when I was a kid and had come home from something awful. "It's over," he said. "It's finally over." I repeated. The rain fell on the 3 of us, a steady, indifferent drizzle that was completely unimpressed, the way Seattle rain always is. I tilted my face up, letting the cold, clean, real drops hit my skin. Then we walked down the steps together. 2 weeks after the verdict, I drove to the Seattle Police Evidence Office on Fifth Avenue. No Julian, no Leo, no lawyers. Just me, a ticking parking meter, and a crisp December morning that smelled of salt and the damp metallic promise of snow. The officer at the counter was young, with a kind face. He found the evidence bag in under 5 minutes and slid it toward me with a release form. I signed it, tore the red evidence seal, and emptied the contents right into my hand. The silver locket landed in my palm, and a part of my soul recognized it, the way a body recognizes fire after a long, deep chill. The sterling was tarnished at the edges with that specific look that only comes from years of touch and the unique chemistry of a person's life. The engraving on the front was just as beautifully imperfect as I remembered. There were 2 tiny nicks on the back, fine, parallel marks where Julian had tried to force the clasp open with a blade. I traced them with my nail. "You all right, Mom?" the officer asked, his voice gentle. "Yes," I said, and it was the truth. I was still standing at the counter when the officer cleared his throat. "One last thing. A letter came for you this morning from a federal processing center. The sender put this down as the address. You want it." He held out a simple white envelope. My name was written on it in a script I would know anywhere that particular way he always looped the tail on the capital E. I took it. I walked over to the bench by the door, sat down, and broke the seal. The letter was 2 pages, written on lined paper with a cheap ballpoint pen. His handwriting was smaller than I remembered, tight and compressed, like someone writing with very little space. "Elara," it started. "I don't expect you'll even read this, but I have to write it anyway. There are things I should have said that I couldn't say in that courtroom with all those people staring. I know you assume everything I do is just an act. And maybe you're right, but I'm going to try and give you the truth for what it's worth. When I first asked you on a date, I had no idea who your family was. I know that sounds exactly like what a guilty man would say, but it's true. I just knew you were brilliant. The way you spoke about history and the stories objects told was like nothing I had ever heard before. I fell for your mind long before I knew about your money. But somewhere along the line, knowing about it all it shattered something inside me. Not because I wanted it, but because standing beside it, I finally understood how little I was. I felt like a forgery next to you, Elara. A very good copy, but never the original article. And I just couldn't stand that feeling, so I gave up trying to be real and just started taking. I know it doesn't excuse a thing. I know Mia will grow up knowing who her father was. That's the one weight I can't put down, the burden I'll carry for my entire life, and I've earned it. I just need you to know I did love you. Whatever that love turned into, whatever I twisted it into, there was something real underneath it all at the start. I need you to know that. I folded the letter, held it for 5 seconds. He was at it again. Even from a prison cell with a ballpoint pen, Julian Thorne was trying to rewrite history. Not I betrayed you, but I was in pain. Not I chose to defraud you, but your world broke me. The letter was a masterpiece of construction, just like all his other carefully worded apologies. Just enough real emotion was threaded through it to make the manipulation almost impossible to spot unless you were looking for it. I was looking for it. I walked over to the garbage can by the door and dropped the letter in. I didn't pause. I dropped it like you set down a tool when the job is finished. Then I walked out into the crisp December air and fastened the silver locket around my neck. The metal was cold on my skin for only a moment before it became warm. Mia was at the waterfront park with Leo when I got there, which was the plan we'd made. She needed somewhere fun to be while I ran my errand this morning. The park that hugged the Sound was quiet on a weekday in December, just a couple of joggers and an old man tossing crackers to a squabbling cloud of seagulls. Mia spotted me from 50 feet away and reacted with that pure, full-bodied joy that only toddlers and puppies seem to manage. She launched herself across the frosty grass at a speed that was genuinely startling, hitting my legs at full force with her arms wrapped around me and her cold nose pressed into my coat. "Mommy, we saw an otter," she yelled into my side. "In the water! A real one!" It looked right at Uncle Leo and then dove down. "It did not look at me," Leo said, walking up behind her. "It looked at the waves." "It looked at you," Mia insisted, with the total certainty of a 5-year-old. She grabbed my hand, pulling me towards the railing. "Come see if it comes back. I bet it will." "Otters don't come when you call them," Leo said. "This one might," she countered. I let her pull me. The harbor was a sheet of still, gray glass. We stood there a while, the three of us, while Mia chirped at the water, failing to summon an otter, but earning a respectful nod from the seagull man. Finally, Mia announced that the otter had probably gone to get lunch, and that we should too, and could we please get hot chocolate with the tiny marshmallows, the little ones. Not the big ones, because those are way too sugary. The big ones are far too sweet, Leo agreed with a solemn nod. "Exactly," Mia said. She slipped one hand into mine and the other into Leo's and marched us toward the park gates with the swagger of a general who has just solved a difficult strategic problem. I looked down at her small, cold hand in mine, so completely sure that the person holding it would never ever let go. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out an old external hard drive from a dusty box, my original backup. I sat for a moment while the house was still quiet. The plastic casing was covered in tiny scratches from years of being tossed in bags and moved between apartments. I reached out and traced one with my finger. The silver surface was cool against my skin. The little marks Ethan had made on my confidence were still there. I wasn't going to try to erase them. Not to remember what he did, but because I learned something essential from building complex systems. The marks of a life fought for are not the same thing as damage. They are proof, the story of what survives. The small charm on her bracelet pulsed a tiny heartbeat every 15 seconds. I'd run a diagnostic that morning, and it pinged our encrypted family servers instantly rock solid, just like always. Every 15 seconds. A silent, steady pulse. My dad built the prototype after his own sister was taken from a playground when they were kids. He never stopped preparing for the absolute worst, and I professionalized it. Aegis Digital, the data vaults, the recovery protocols, it was all the same mission, just dressed up for the boardroom. I spent my whole life building fortresses for wealthy clients. It just never dawned on me I might need one for myself. "Mama." Lily bounced over, holding 2 steaming cups, her cheeks flushed red from the lakeside wind. glowing with the pure triumph of scoring a fancy hot chocolate. I got you the one with extra whipped cream. The best kind, I smiled. Obviously, she said, wriggling onto the bench beside me. She leaned into my side with that complete, trusting weight of a child who feels safe and warm and wants nothing more than to be right there. I wrapped my hands around the cup's warmth and just breathed, my daughter tucked against me, the vast, gray expanse of Lake Michigan before us. And I finally understood a truth I'd been circling for months but couldn't name. Security isn't something someone else can give you. And love isn't a ring exchanged at an altar or a promise made on a snowy Chicago night. It's something you build, one brick at a time, one choice after another, the quiet, constant work of protecting what matters. A city bus hissed by. A flock of pigeons took flight. She took a happy sip of her drink. I took one of mine. The day felt almost perfect. Looking back, I need to tell you what I wish I'd known before my world came apart. Family envy doesn't ring the doorbell. It does to send a polite email. It just shows up on a new tablet, synced to a shared family cloud, revealing 5 years of a secret life you were never supposed to find. Don't be me. Don't wait for irrefutable proof before you listen to that voice in your head. That tiny part of you that is adding up all the little inconsistencies and whispered excuses. That part of you is never wrong. I'm not the hero in this tale of betrayal. This whole mess taught me the only firewall that mattered was the one I needed to build against my own desperate wish to believe the lie. And let me be clear, the revenge wasn't the cure. The multi-million-dollar settlement definitely helped. But the real healing? That was my daughter's small hand in mine on a cold park bench in November, and the unshakable feeling that I had finally built something real that no one could ever take away. I'm convinced some people walk into our lives right when we need to become who we're meant to be. My best friend, my therapist, and sometimes the stronger version of ourselves. Stories of family drama and fighting back always have the same ending the moment someone refuses to stay broken. At least that's what I believe. Every story of justice starts with the choice to stop being the victim. So put yourself first. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs the reminder. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength. You just never know whose life you might change. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. One last thing, the stories here are fictionalized to explore real-life themes for insight and growth. If that's not for you, I get it. Go find what you need. But if you're staying with me, I am so glad you are here.